we're in AP Lit, and we're talking about Huck Finn today. And then you read this, all the episodes, and there's several chapters, probably the longest section of the book, with the Wilkes family and all that. And some of the funniest things in the book, to me, are in that. And so, what do you do with that? Each one of those episodes, I think, reveals one of the themes of the book. So, I will ask if anybody wants to start. I will call in. We just go around and go with Lily.
Well, I think that the last couple of chapters we read were really important for Huck's character, because you see him go from lying his way out of every single situation to, like, finally he realizes that his lying is just not going to cut it all the time, and he actually has to confess and tell the truth about the Duke and the King and the scheme they have on the Wilkes brothers. And we also see him being, like, sympathetic of Mary, who he tells about the lie, and how he actually just does the right thing for once, and he feels like he has to do the right thing because he's always usually, like, leaving the situation and, like, telling himself, oh, it's fine, but he actually feels like it's not fine this time, so he has to do something about it.
Do you remember the motivation that he had for telling Mary the truth? It went through his head, because you're right, he tells lies usually, and the safest thing is a lie. But what came to him that made him realize telling the truth? Well, I'm trying to give it away. Do you remember what his motivation was?
It's that sometimes, like, lying would be riskier than telling the truth.
It's still motivated by the same thing. It's still motivated by self-preservation. This time, the truth actually is the smartest thing to do. It's not like he's against lying. It's that what's the most practical thing in every situation. And one last thing. You remember when they decided, I think we may have mentioned this, when they decided to, early in their trip, to steal only certain things? Remember their conscience kind of hurt them about stealing people out of people's yards or fields. You remember how they resolved that? They shouldn't steal, right? They shouldn't pay for it, or they should ask permission, but they just steal. And so, how do they deal with that moral problem? Yeah.
Don't they just call it borrowing?
Say that again.
Don't they call it borrowing so that they don't feel it's not?
Well, of course, yeah. If you ever borrowed a pencil, if you ever borrowed $5, what do you really mean when you say you borrow? Actually, Colo folks are really good about borrowing. Borrowing, they really mean it. I mean, I don't think any teacher is going to miss a pencil. I don't mean that. But usually when we say borrow, we mean, will you give it to me? But we use the word borrow to kind of, like that suggests, oh, I'll give it back. So that's one way. But you remember they decided not to take certain things? So they justified stealing by saying, we won't take persimmons, and we won't take, I can't remember what the other thing was, things they don't like anyway. So to me, he's consistently realistic, and he's consistently, what's the word I'm trying to think of? Rationalizes his sins. He would not use the word sin, but rationalize his immorality. He wouldn't even use that. You know what I mean? Just like we do. We may be in principle against something, but when we do it, we rationalize it. Yeah, but. And so, it's just why we're reading the book 150 years after it was written, is because of things like that. It's just like me, and it's just like people I know. Yeah.
When you kind of see that rationalizing in, like, the king and the duke too, like when like, even though they're all planning just to get more money in the end, like, they have to, like, keep their cover, and so they give, like, a portion of that money to the Wilkes girls, and, like, just to, cover up their lies, but that still has that kind of rationalizing and trying to do, like,
And so what's ironic is one of the questions of the quiz. What's ironic about them, out of their own pocket, of course it's not their own money, it's money they stole from somebody else, but out of their own pocket, they give up money. You have to spend money to make money. That's a business kind of principle. But then ironic that they're losing money on this deal, whereas I can't remember if you've read the whole deal. I can't remember what happens at the end. Have they left the place by chapter 29? I think so. And you know, they have nothing. They lost everything. All that on paper, you know, they literally had in their hands. But selling all the slaves and everything, and all that money, they didn't get a single penny of it. In fact, they lost money on the deal. And again, that's irony and it's satire when you have to laugh at it. But it's like, yeah, that's human nature. It's funny, but isn't that how silly we are? So yeah, good point on both accounts. Others. How about Becca? There's a lot of material here, a lot to cover.
I thought it was kind of weird how he didn't really care about stealing from the Wilkes until Mary Jane came in and like they became kind of friends, and then he felt bad, so he had to tell her about everything. And it's just kind of weird how that's when his morality came into play, because like normal people would probably feel bad about stealing from it, but he didn't.
Yeah, and he doesn't like the Duke and the King, and they don't have a lot of choice. I mean, I have a little sympathy. We probably do have sympathy for Huck and Jim, because their lives and their freedom is in the Duke and the King's hands, and they're told to be a part of this, or at least Huck is. He doesn't have a lot of choice. He doesn't like them, but at least for the first time, you're right, he does something about it. He stands up to them in a way, which is, that whole scene is funny. I hope any of you find this funny. To me, it's like going back to an old friend, and like I've seen most Andy Griffith episodes 100 times each, and I still laugh. I'm anticipating. I know what he's going to say. I've memorized it by heart, and yet when he says it, I can see the look in your eye. You watch that stuff, but I laugh at it because it's an old friend. You know, it's not new news and it's not bad news. Okay, I can go back to a world that never changed since 1960, and I know it's an escape, but to me, Huck Finn is like that.
I just thought it was interesting how like the author keeps like bringing Huck to these people, and he has these connections that kind of make him more, or like with Buck and then with Mary Jane, because he like makes a connection with them, and then he kind of wants to like keep helping them in a way, and so, but then all of a sudden you think that he'll like still like stay around for them, but then he just leaves. And like for the Mary Jane one, he just like he saw that when he was like walking out, he saw like the light in the window, but then like even though like he still had some sort of like draw to like try to stay with her, like he just left because he knew that he had to like protect Jim and just leave from trying to get away from the
He
Duke.
had no. To me, that was really sad. As he walked by the window, and remember what he says about it? That girl had more sand. I can't remember the exact word. She had more sand in her. You know what he means by that? Have any idea what that has to do with? I mean, how's that a compliment, or what is the compliment? There was a John Wayne movie back in the '60s called True Grit, which I thought was kind of an odd title, and I never really saw it. But grit is the same. That's what he's talking about. Grit, we would say, or Dabo Sweeney would say, guts. Our coaches used to use the term guts. You know, do you have? What's a word that you would use today? Have you got something in you that you got a backbone, you got nerve, you got courage, you got guts, you got grit, you got sand. He saw something in her that was practical, and even though she was romantic, you know, she has a lot of things that she does. He's gullible in that sense. She gets fooled by the Duke and the King. He likes her because of that, you know, and that is, I never thought of that. The Buck, now Mary Ann, or Mary Jane, which is it? Is it Mary Jane?
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't last long, and it is kind of sad. Yeah.
Well, I think it's interesting to see how like when Huck was with the Granderfords, how like when he forgot what his name was, and he was lying about that, he came up with like, oh, well, how do you spell my name? And then the guy spelled it, and he was like, okay, so that was when I told my name was. But then when he came to like the Wilkes, he wrapped up in it. And when he was with Joanna, he kinda got stuck and it kinda like failed on him. So I think it's funny to see how like earlier he was like lying was like his one go-to, but now he's like starting to see how it's doesn't always work, like Lily said.
Because there's some people out there as smart as he is, you know, they're good for him. What does, we've said this before, but what, you mentioned the name thing is a good example. What is it about his lying, not the lying part, but what is it about the ability to lie in those situations that you kind of admire about him? At least I do.
I think that the fact that he's so good at lying, like when he met the Duke and Dolphin, he knew that they were frauds because I think probably because he's usually lies, so he picked up on it, but he didn't tell Jim.
Right.
So I think that the fact that he lied helped him pick up on that.
Right.
So
And he's like him. He's a
Yeah.
con man. Isn't he a con man? Isn't Huck a con man, a con boy? I mean, if you lie and deceive people to get things, that's what a con man is. And yet, again, he's harmless. He doesn't hurt people. What I was getting to say is, I admire the ability to think on your feet. Now, I think truth is always the answer, but the fact that he can think on his feet, I don't know how many of us have that. You know, like you're in a debate and somebody throws out something, how do you respond to that? Or if you're good at thinking and quick-witted, you'll come up with an answer. Or you'll just sit there like with your mouth out, you know, capitulate. You win, I lose. You know, I just admire somebody when things get tough. It's like he gets better. Most of us, when things get tough, we get worse. You know, we just throw out everything. This isn't what I'm prepared for. But man, when things get rough or Huck, man, that's when he gets in. That's it. He's at his best. That's what I'm trying to say. But
Speaking of that exact same thing, like thinking on your feet, the king does something kind of funny that's like
Yeah.
that. He goes, he liked everybody, so it's fitting that his funeral order should be in public. And when the Duke like writes him a note, it's like it's obsequies or whatever the word is. And
you said it. I mean, I don't even think of that word as a bad thing in this book. You know, if you think about what the word means, it's awful, but not in this book. It's just funny.
But yeah, and instead of just like going out and saying and starting to say that word, he goes like it's made out of the Greek word orgo, outside, and he goes there and he's like, so you see funeral orgies as an open or public funeral. And he
Yeah,
convinces
that's
everybody with
that's
the
great.
doctor.
Yeah, that's exactly what he, in front of a crowd. He doesn't say it immediately. You notice he doesn't get the note and then correct himself. He's so smart. He lets the note sit there so people forget that he got the note, and then he says, oh, by the way, you know, a few minutes later when he feels like people have forgotten it, you know, you just have, and of course you have to admire Mark Twain, who seems to understand these people. Maybe he's one himself. Maybe all writers are con men. You know, they're deceiving you, and yet you love it. You know, this book is not real, but it seems real. There's not much difference. Remember, stories and lies. You know, they're very close in a way. All right, good. Who's next? Yes.
I kind of like the end of the book where Mark Twain uses this kind of like subtle irony when they're trying to like Jim and Huck had just escaped like from the mob and they had gotten the raft and Huck is kind of like dancing around on the raft like we finally got rid of him.
Yeah.
And then 2 seconds later here come
Yeah.
the king and Duke back again.
Yeah.
And it's just like off that cliffhanger comes the next chapter.
And they change, you know, by the next chapter in this next section. By the way, you're at the next section that many people consider the inferior section of the book. And you'll have to read it to see why they think that. I'll just let you to make that decision. But the best, I think you've actually read the best part of the book. And isn't that something? Here's a book that's clearly not perfect. There are actually flaws in the book. And yet, even with its flaws, it's considered the best book. Isn't that something? A book that has perhaps as many flaws as this might have, it's still better than anything else other people have created, in some people's opinion. So anyway, that's a great point. Ian, what you got?
I think probably is the morality of Huck in this one.
explain what you mean. What do you mean it's different? Why is it different?
Well, I'm pretty sure it's because he met Mary Jane
Okay.
and all the girls.
Yeah, I see.
This is about an hour ago. It would have been a little different, but now it made me feel bad and disappointed. So
Yeah.
now he's just clearly already done with it, and I think that what like kind of foreshadows his lies to the king and the dolphin to get away, to the king and the duke to get away.
What were we talking about recently? Maybe it wasn't even this class, but what is it? Where it's like on the tip of my tongue. You fool somebody. In other words, I don't remember what it was,
Only
but
one shame on you.
what?
Only one shame on you.
I'm sorry, I can't.
Fool me one shame on you.
Yeah, but there was an incident or a story we read where somebody fooled somebody, and the whole purpose was to fool them. And what is that? Anyway, my point is, if I get to know somebody, I'll lose my desire, if I had any, desire to hurt them or fool them. The more I get to know the person, the less likely I would want to hurt them. And I think that's what Huck is doing. He now knows Marianne. He likes her. And can't hurt her. His heart is really in the right place. He doesn't want to hurt people. He doesn't hurt people. And he's around people that do. And the contrast is always so clear. Owen, anything you can add?
I just thought it was, a bunch of people have said this, but I just thought it was interesting, the dynamic, that Huck is kind of on the other side, because before, he was the one telling all the lies, but now he's watching it, he's watching people tell lies, and he's considering, and eventually does, like, snitching, or like, telling people about the lie, which, like, before, if people told about a lie, he would despise them, especially if it was his lie. So I think it's interesting how he's changing from this person who lies all the time only for his own gain to a person that for his own gain he lies and he tells the truth. So it's just interesting to see how he portrays the king and the duke as, like, as Ian said, disgusting, and when they're lying, but he was doing that like a couple chapters
Right.
ago.
And you'll see the end of that. That subplot of the story does have an ending. It just does, they don't just drop it. And you might be able to draw some conclusions about that. Yes.
I was gonna say, at the very end of, at the end of chapter 29, when the Duke and the King have caught up to them, and they're, obviously gonna get on the raft, I thought it's gonna be interesting to see, what Huck is gonna tell them, because I don't think that he'll tell them the truth about him running away. I think he'll
Yeah.
figure out something to tell them. and
Well,
then-
you're on the right track, I promise you. In terms of, is he gonna tell them the truth? It always bothered me, you've taken ethics, have you taken ethics? Did you ever do that? Mr. Storch used to teach a class. You'd read the Sproul book, R.C. Sproul. Anyway, they would discuss the ethic of lying. The one thing that always bothered me, not bothered me, but I couldn't quite figure it out. Like Rahab in the Bible, she lied about the spies when they came and asked for them, the spies from Joshua. She's not considered a bad person. In fact, just the opposite. She's actually in the genealogy in Matthew for Jesus. So, I guess is lying always wrong?
Wasn't she also a prostitute?
Yes, yeah. So is lying always wrong? No false witness, that's one of the 10 Commandments. Is that the last one, or next to last one? I think it's the last one. But anyway, yeah.
Well, I was just gonna say, also David's in the genealogy of Jesus, and while he did a bunch of great things, he also sinned too, so I don't know if, like.
Well, you just said it. It's still a sin. But it's forgiven, because David is like, he's like way up there. Think about Abraham. Twice he called his wife his sister. Listen, when you go to this king, you're my sister, right? And then the king was getting ready to marry her, and God intervened. And he didn't trust God to protect, but at one time he said, well, she really is my sister, you know, because she was like a cousin or something, or, you know, there is a, but it was not, it was a half-truth. So I just think this book raises that issue. Okay, he's not here. How about, Parker's not here? Clay? Yes, he.
I'm gonna go back to the whole irony and the comedy part of the chapters.
Good.
I thought it was really funny and ironic how all of the tests to figure out who is the real cousins, or who is the real uncles versus the king and the duke. And I thought it was funny how all of those tests failed, like miserably. Like the writing test, it was written by the mute uncle, but the mute uncle broke his hand so he couldn't write. But also that means he couldn't communicate because he needed to sign, and he couldn't sign with a broken hand. Also with the tattoo, both of them got it wrong. You'd think that they would know what type of tattoo was on their brother, but they didn't.
Well, again, think about
It's on gold.
the king and the duke, or the king was the one who came immediately. He didn't waver and wonder. He said, okay, he came up with a lie, you know, right up top of his head. But that's brilliant, the writing, the fact that, you know, all those little details, like the Armin, he couldn't write, you know, to me, that's a good point. And it's really, I think it's really interesting the way he organized it. Emma Shea.
I did notice that one of the main points throughout the book so far is how when people lie, it usually does catch up with them, or they feel guilty about it. And you can especially see that with Huck when he lies about Jim, and whenever he's with the Duke and the King, he always mentions that he feels guilty about it, or the people find out that they've been lying. And I kind of thought that the Duke and the King would stop doing that at some point, because they keep going from town to town scamming people, but it seems to catch up with them every time, so I thought that was interesting.
You know, one thing is at 68, I think I've learned is that people don't change easily. And even if you pray for people to change, it's not easy for people to change. And, I have this belief, because it's also something I think is scriptural, is that often God gives people over to their sin. Okay, you want to sin? I've been warning you. You've been ignoring me. Have at it. And to me, that explains why some people do awful things. In his wisdom, he allows people to do exactly the hardened heart thing with Pharaoh. One interpretation of that is that when it said God hardened Pharaoh's heart, it was like he just withdrew his restraint and said, have at it, Pharaoh, do whatever you want to do. And I've also come to a conclusion about myself, and maybe about you too. The worst thing in the world is for me to get what I want a lot of the time. I've learned that I don't want the best things for myself. So going back to the Duke and the King, why don't they change? You and I let's just look at the facts, good and bad. Wouldn't you want to change? People don't change. And I think that's one thing that's, to me, true to life. Can I mention a few things as we finish up? Really questions. Explain the theme of mobs, M-O-B-S. I said that was a theme. I'm going to give you two examples. The group that comes after Sherburne at night to lynch him, the guy who kills Fox, and the camp meeting where the king is able to steal money, right out under their noses. What do those two incidents tell us about mobs? If you want to think of that, both the Grangerfords and the Shepherdsons are like mobs, out of control groups of people. Yeah, what are those incidents?
They're intimidating and they're like scary, but like you can easily outwit, break them up. Like they're not that strong when you actually plan to take them down. Like even if you just walk at them, but they look strong, but they're not as strong as they seem.
Yeah, that's an interesting dichotomy, isn't it? Mobs, by definition, are a lot of people that are more than you, and And yet, at the same time, mobs can be easily swayed one way or the other. The nice mob at church, the camp meeting, they're swayed to believe this liar and huckster. They believe him. They even give him the plate. What is that plate called? The offering plate. Let him take the plate, which is to me an irony. Yeah.
Well, I think like a majority of mobs like have that like mob mentality where they don't really know what they're doing. They're just kind of following, whatever the person in front of them is doing. And so they're kind of like blinded by what actually is going on, and they're just following the crowd.
And at some point, they're uncontrollable. They're gonna do damage. We've seen that. But at some other point, they can be led and swayed. Tell me, in the last minute, what makes a good con man? If you wanna look both at Huck, who's not really a con man, but the Duke and the King, why are they so successful? What are the characteristics of a con man? Yeah.
Well, like in the situation of like them giving up, some of what they had, or like kind of having to give up anything really to get the final result, and just being able to see the big picture, not just what's right in front of you. I think that's a big part of.
Good point, yes.
Good at thinking on their feet.
They what?
They're good at thinking on their feet.
Yes, and what did they do before they pretended to be the Wilkes brothers? How did,
Research.
exactly, what were you gonna say?
I was gonna say that they got information.
Information. And ultimately, that, you have to have information to be a good conqueror. And think about, we're in an information era, and people use information against us, but you've gotta be smart. You can't be a dumb con man. You wouldn't be very successful. Good job with that. I'll see you tomorrow, but I can't tell you right now what the next reading is as we do next week. We're actually coming very close to the end of the book. So, keep reading and we'll see you tomorrow. Yeah, you go ahead. I don't think you get any more.
So I might be able to get my last quiz, right, over Google Classroom.
I better check. I'm not sure.
Okay, like I turned it in and everything.
Well, I wanna get
appreciate it.
Lydia's, Huck Finn.
Yes, yeah, it was, I think it was 12/3/19 or something like that, maybe? I don't know,
Well,
but
that's helpful.
I did that
Yeah.
over, but that's on
No,
Google
I'm glad
Classroom.
you told me.
Yeah.
Good reminder.
Of course, thank you, Mr. Goff.
Yeah, we'll see ya.